I'm Alice Leung. I'm an investor at Brick and Mortar Ventures, spent a little bit of time in the construction space. And before I let the panelists introduce themselves, I want to set the stage on kind of just, where we started and kind of where we're at today. So AI has kind of been around for a little while. I don't think anyone wants to argue that, it's very new just in the last couple of years. But I do think with the introduction of, OpenAI's ChatGPT back in November of 2022, I think that's when things really got put on the map in terms of AI. And from then until now, you've probably seen a couple of different buzzwords, whether it's internally at the companies, whether tech side or the construction company side, or whether just peer marketing, right? You've seen almost every company is an AI company now. 5 to 10 years ago, every company was a tech company. Now every company is an AI company. And there's been these terms, LLMs, AI co-pilot, agentic AI. This has all kind of just been in the evolution of some of the new developments around AI. And I guess the main thing to kind of think about is really just, how much less human in the loop it is. And that's kind of been the developments that we've really seen accelerate in the last couple of years. So the newest kind of topic, agentic AI. So Atul kind of showed that slide with trunk tools and how they were showing, now we will have AI agents that can really perform different tasks that almost kind of indicate, a task of, different roles within a construction company. So that's kind of where we're at today with the latest types of AI. And with that, I'll actually let our panelists introduce themselves, tell the audience, who you are, what do you do, the company that you work for.
Perfect, thank you, Alice. My name is Tai Nguyen. I'm with Hensel Phelps Construction. Been with Hensel Phelps for, I think, going on 20 years. Today, currently, I lead our business unit Diverge, which is our corporate venture arm and all innovation for Hensel Phelps.
Good morning. My name is Kaushal Diwan. I work at DPR Construction. I've been here for about 14 years. I've been in the industry for about almost 20 years. I played my first job, I was an estimator. Actually, VDC and BIM is what brought me to DPR, and I had a chance to work with Hanu and the team. And in the last 10 years, my role, I've focused on innovation, R&D, and venture capital. So today, I lead our venture capital group, W&D Ventures, and I support our innovation and R&D teams.
Hey guys, I'm Aaron. I'm a managing partner for GS Futures, single LP fund. So we have one large LP, it's a big Korean organization called GS, and we invest seed to Series B in construction and real estate related technology.
Awesome, thank you. So as you can see, we have a wide range of different experiences here, investing in kind of different ways from a criteria perspective. I actually took down two kind of phrases that Atul had mentioned in his presentation. Data as an asset and data as gold. So kind of diving into the questions, construction company data is really, the lifeblood, right? All of, historical information, current information, a lot of that is helping construction companies with understanding, what to build, if you want to get into predictive analytics, any of that stuff, it's all kind of predicated on the data that you have. So starting off, with that, how do you judge what's enough to have a product? So I'll let Aaron kind of jump into that first.
Yeah, maybe you said product, so I'll do this. Tech and product are different, right? I think number one is framing do I need a product? Am I looking for someone to build something that I can ship off, do minimal training, and it works? And to do that, you need a lot of data, right? Because you're expecting a result of that productized technology to help someone with their day-to-day task. No one wants to put more energy or remove themselves from a really busy job site or a really challenging job in the office to fiddle with technology that may or may not help. And so I think your question on data is maybe a really good one around product evolution, and it's are you sure you're getting results from something? A lot of these technologies are fairly early still. Some are pretty killer, right? But a lot are still in the early productization phase, early product market fit. And those, you don't need as much data to get to that MVP phase. You need just enough to prove a thesis and just enough relationships to let other people tell you why it's wrong. And so I think this question of how much data do you need reflects a little bit on like what do I want here? Do I want to try something new, or do I want to scale, set it and forget it, remove hours from someone's day? And those are like very different lifts.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point in terms of like data and workflow, right? And how much data is needed. So if you think back to, I mentioned ChatGPT, November 2022, that was trained on basically everything on the internet, right? And if you compare that with
copyrighted or not,
also true. But when you think about that versus like construction data, right? You could think about all of our different data silos. There's probably a lot that's still in paper, in file cabinets and all that. So thinking about all our different data sources, how does one kind of capture all of that data, at least like from the construction supply chain, to be able to leverage that for some type of like product and whatnot. So I think there is a little bit of a challenge on for us like a data side. So what is data worth then, right? If you look across any of the organizations that you guys work with, what is that data worth? Ty?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. But great point there. I think for us, and within construction, we all know we take and we aggregate a ton of data. We create a ton of data. And I think our perspective was we did this exercise where it's similar to, I think, when I was in the field where, as a superintendent, you would manage different scopes of work. And, one of them is water penetration, right? So you would do this exercise called follow the water. You start to understand how water starts, right? Within that, how it trickles through the facility or building envelope, and start to understand really the penetration points and the quality, potential quality issues. And so we did that same exercise with data, to your point, Alice, right? Where does it start? It doesn't start in construction in many ways, right? It starts upstream. Within that, obviously, we build on these data sets, right, from our designers, working with our trade partners, working with our owners. So for us, that question is, what is your data worth? I get asked that question a lot. And for me, initially, it was really trying to put a monetary value to that. But it's really, I think, as I reflect on my 20 years, we've been working with data for a long time. A case in point, I have an example where it was a project that we had in 2010 where I had a team of 45 laser scanning every day, 3 shifts a day, and a team overnight registering and processing. We were capturing so much data, but what was that data worth at that time? As I reflect, there was cases where our intention in capturing that data didn't reflect really some of the value that we gleaned from it, meaning that, we were looking at these pop-outs as part of the capture. There's 1,000 pop-outs on site. The process and design was that the designers had to go and physically measure each pop-out to create, again, the structure around these pop-outs. It would take them 6 to 8 hours per pop-out. But because we grabbed it via the laser scanning process, they were able to as-built those pop-outs within the digital environment, right? And so right there, you can quickly put a monetary value to what that data provided, right? And so similar, I think, with what we're doing with AI today, it's finding those ways that we can be more predictive, right? And so is it decreasing safety incidents, right? There's a value to that. Is it creating automation in our workflows? Is it saving an office engineer 2 hours a day? Then you start to relate and put some value to that data. But for us, I think those are the exciting times coming ahead as we're starting to kind of, again, be more predictive on what we're doing with our data.
I'll throw some stuff in there. We talk about what is that data worth? And if you think back to Tul's presentation, right, he talked about we're generating all this value and the life cycle cost is becoming increasingly more important, right, for owners. And in a lot of cases, maybe 100% of the time, and if I were to just take a stab at it, I'd say that data is worth more than the building itself in a lot of cases. Now, the challenges that we have to face is, so today's contractual structure that we have with our owners, right? There's a lot of contracts that we sign that says we cannot share that data because it's the owner's data. DPR does not own that data. Hence, Phillips, you guys don't own that data, right? And the AI models today for construction require data to build something that is usable for us, right? So it's like you got this sort of challenge of, well, you need my data to build your model, but I can't share my data, so I'm sort of stuck in this in-between zone. So how do you that's a challenge that I think we're all gonna have to overcome, is how do you create a process where we can actually share this data, it's allowable by contract, and we can build a model that's actually usable, for the industry.
And you bring up such a good point because, like you mentioned, we've got a lot of AI-related startups out there, right? They would love to train their models on any of your guys' data, right? Because you guys have so much. So kind of, the next point is kind of thinking about, data privacy. What is the data worth to different parts of the supply chain now, including the tech vendors, right? So when you're thinking about all of that type of stuff, and also, there's also this idea of proprietary data, right? That contractors are producing or designers are producing, different people in the supply chain are producing and consuming different types of data. So when you kind of put it from that lens, then you think about, if I am going to implement AI, how do I decide whether I buy something or do I build it in-house? And I know Kaushal or Ty, if you want to.
Yeah, I can go first if you don't mind. Should have the VC separate the contractors. No, we're all good friends.
Stand over here.
What's interesting, so Tool had that slide about the different types of skill set that you need as a construction company today that maybe you didn't need 5-10 years ago, right? And you actually do need somebody that understands how to take the information, engineer it in a way that AI can process it, and then somebody that can build the architecture of how to ingest it for the guy that's on the field who's actually going to use that information. I think, I lost my train of thought now. Thank you. But what was the last part of your question again?
Build versus buy.
Build versus buy. Where I was going with this is that we are now requiring to have in-house expertise that says, okay, can we leverage a large language model like OpenAI or something like that, create partnerships with them, and then augment that information with the workforce that we already have? Or is it better for us to build something internally? And quite often, partnership is kind of where we're leaning towards more, instead of trying to build this stuff internally and trying to recreate the wheel with our own staff.
Yeah, no, great point. I think build versus buy, it's a complex situation. I think talking to Thomas Law the other day and many of my counterparts in here, there's some headwind. Like within Hensel Phelps today, with anything that we look at, whether it's process automation, it is, taking captures of photos on a job site and using AI for it. It's, in years past, well, actually not too long ago, that anything that had AI was really attractive. Like you wanted to go and touch that solution. Today, anything that has AI, it's whole red flag. And then I'm sitting down with legal, I'm sitting down with governance, and we're like, oh, what are they doing with our data? Is it democratized? Are they sharing it? What are they using as far as models? How many models are they using? And 3 months go by, I'm like, wow, this is still a good solution. So there's some of that headwind today that I think every organization is going through. But I think within Hensel Phelps, and probably similar to many of you, we put through a process of evaluation, right? First business case, what is that doing, whether it's to a workflow or a need that we have. Within that, we put it through certain gates. So gate 1 is, again, business case. Gate 2 is really my team diverge, getting in there and understanding solvency with many of these things, right? It's, this partner that we're looking to partner with, what does their runway look like, right? If we're signing them for a 36-month contract, they got runway for 6 months. That could be a problem, right? Things like that we really haven't looked at before. And then obviously it's a cybersecurity, AI review, legal review, and so right now it's a pretty rigorous process, but once we get through that, we look internally. Do we have the capabilities to go develop that internally? Not all of us have a resource like Mark back there, right, that can go and figure this stuff out, and so within that, we have to understand what our capabilities are. In many ways, we go through that exercise. Is this something we can build in-house? Is it something that we can partner with? I think if you drink the Kool-Aid, which a lot of us have, it's these tools that are coming to industry today, and they're telling us that you can develop this in months. Is that really true? Right? And so we've gone through some of that iteration, and we realize we don't have the capabilities, we don't have the resources. We can build, but it's just good enough. It's not building to that trajectory. What we want is that ideal state. And so that's where we've been getting a lot of success partnering, right? We're buying, but then in that same word, we're partnering and helping grow these solutions. And something to resonate with what the tool says, to do this, we're not looking to do it on our own. I mean, I would love to bring Kaushal in. I would love to bring a tool in. Our peers out there, I think in this landscape today, truly Hensel Phelps cannot just drive innovation by ourselves, and we have limited resources. That's why we love to partner. I think I'm on the phone today with Kaushal more than I ever care to. Suffolk, all these groups out there that are willing to partner and kind of drive industry. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I do like that there's a emphasis on cybersecurity. I feel like I've always thought that was important, but really not until we started talking about AI when we're starting to see, I would say like language and contracts around cybersecurity and, people stealing data, on the startup side, right? On the vendor side, we're now starting to see like cybersecurity, or clients start asking about cybersecurity requirements and stuff like that.
One last thing to add, sorry. We do have a project today. It's a large aviation project and very restrictive in terms of the use of AI. With anything that we bring to that project, we have to go through a review process. And then when you start to say, put that heavy governance on AI, it's in everything, that we use today. And so it's been a pretty rigorous process. And a lot of it, honestly, is just educating our owners today and partnering with them in a way that, because, I understand. I think IP, sensitivity, their data, they don't want out there. And so we have to really be mindful of that.
I feel like we've covered all the watchwords here already. So, I think there's one, I'm going to give you a hot take. Office problem and field problem. I think cybersecurity is an office problem, not a field problem, more often than not, because most jobs are not airport jobs. DoD, right? Use case, like please don't, but like a lot of stuff, residential building is 50% of the value of construction, right? Like I have not bumped into that being quite the same pain point. So I do think there's like this interesting nuance of like, again, product or tech, and who's client that dictates it in a really interesting way. Sorry, we want to continue with the questions. Yeah.
No, that's a good
Mind if I throw
point.
something in there?
Yeah, please.
So the most toughest part of like our jobs is that we want to be out there promoting open innovation and supporting the startup community and getting that product and innovation out there on the job sites, right? And cybersecurity is an issue, right? Like we can't, anything AI, it's like cybersecurity review, boom, can't go through. And the other part is, as an investor, you want to support somebody from the grassroots efforts, and their product is not going to be mature enough to pass any kind of SOC 2 compliance or what cyber team's looking for. So you're sort of
barely works. Yeah.
you're sort of in this middle zone. It's like, okay, how do I help the startup and promote this product and help it grow at the same time? How do I not piss off the IT guy? You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Actually, Aaron, I wanted to jump to you to talk a little bit about kind of industry-focused solutions versus like kind of overall solutions. Because Kaushal mentioned, trying to figure out, can we just use OpenAI models, right, and kind of tweak it for ourselves, kind of thing. So I'm kind of curious on your takes. We're seeing a lot of funded startups that are building kind of more generalist solutions across, all different industries.
Totally.
So what is your take on like, certain things, do we need construction specific, or do you think at some point, these models are going to get so good that, we're just going to...
I'll give you a little lens. We have a weekly meeting and we talk about a lot of pipeline, right? Every venture fund does this. It's not like unique. And like every time we get to like the fifth question, I go like, what's Notebook LM gonna do?
Yeah.
Right? Like, and it's really the amount of and pace of growth on Perplexity, Notebook, a bunch of others is mind-blowingly good, right? And the other piece that is interesting there is they're readily accessible all the time, right? We'd be foolish to think that a PE or a super doesn't use it on the weekend and not bring it to work on the Monday, right? So like that accessibility barrier is a huge part to adoption. And so when we think about tooling from a industry-specific software, I tend to think of it this way, which is, what's the role level and complexity of the problem being solved? I need an RFI to be better written. I want to get that done right now. I need to refine my supply chain on how I do from drawing to takeoff to quantities, double check the quantities against the required, the articulated requirements in the document, package it on a room by room basis, go prefabricate a bunch of this stuff. And how do I run that workflow for an electrical trade? That's a wholly different problem than like write an RFI. And so I think it comes down to the complexity of what you're solving. And this probably interweaves to our earliest watchword, which is data. on how like you get there. So maybe that's kind of how we frame complexity to drive industry necessity.
Yeah, and I'm sure for the strategics here, as you're thinking about adopting some of these AI solutions, kind of back to like the build versus buy thing, right? Like, now with your investor hat, it's like, how do you think about, do you then invest, how do you think about like investing or just becoming a customer of some of these AI companies? And like, if you were to invest, does that give you kind of a different lens of how you look at it?
I think the investor and a consumer of the product, you have to wear two different hats and you have to balance it really well, right? As a strategic investor, you don't want to be the handcuff that prevents the startup from attracting other investor money or other contractors as being your customers, right? So on one hand, we maintain that balance by creating the strict sort of boundary that, okay, today is an investor discussion. Today is not a customer discussion. I'm not your customer today, I'm your investor. I need to understand how you're growing. I need to understand how I can help you in certain areas. And then how can I be a support to you and help your company grow, right? And in doing so, I've got access to these subject matter experts. I've got access to these job sites. How can I get you closer to the problem that you're trying to solve, right? That's the best thing I can do as an investor. As a customer, I want to treat them as if I'm treating any other product that I'm using, right? It's a commercial relationship with contractual obligations, right? You're teaching them how do I deal with you as a customer, and what challenges I'm going to face by dealing with you as a customer. But at the same time, how do I overcome those and discuss those as a investor? Now, what's nice about AI is we talked about how this is a low margin industry. The challenge that these startups have to overcome is that this is not like I'm going to reach one company and just the fact that I sign an agreement with this one company that I'm going to get this adoption across the board. It doesn't work that way. In construction, every project is literally a balance sheet that you have to overcome and get past, right? So how do you help them get that sort of network effect, right, that as investors look at? Does this product have the ability to have that network effect where just because I deployed it in Chicago that it's going to automatically benefit somebody in Florida, right? That does not happen. AI potentially could have that ability, right? So it's a balance. It's a balance how to be an investor one day, but also a partner and a commercial user the next day.
So with the AI companies, I'm kind of curious, like, when you're thinking about it from an ROI perspective, both from a customer and investor perspective, has it been easier just given, it's a little bit easier of a calculation of like, oh, this tool is helping me save X number of hours. And so I'm curious, like, is it just a easier kind of investment process given in theory it should be a lot more like easily ROI calculated?
I got a story, but I'm gonna ask if you want to take that one first.
No, I'll jump in, and I think everything you said absolutely is right. I think I've been in this role not that long, and I think it took me a long time to understand what Kashu just conveyed. Forever, I was wearing the general contractor hat, right? Always working with startups and leveraging our brand the best we can to get the best deals. And then realize that, oh boy, we're an investor now, right? So I can't go and shrapnel what their future looks like. And I think one thing I add, I think being mindful too, I think as Hensel Phelps, and I'd like to what Kashu says, we expose every startup to our people, our projects, our owners, right? And within that, being really mindful that we don't, kind of guide them too much to develop a Hensel Phelps-centric tool. Because the first thing I caution any startup working with Hensel Phelps is listen, but don't react on everything. It's got to be strategic on your roadmap, and go confirm with other general contractors, right, in terms of what we're asking. Prioritize that way, because I think that's very important, right? Because you don't go and they bring one thing, and the next thing my superintendent's like, well, can you bring a time machine as well? Sure, So they're very good at kind of saying yes, and that's being honest, right? And so, but I think to your question, Alice, I don't know yet if I think it's easier. I think just with the scrutiny that AI has today, I still feel it's governed. It's not like letting AI and these solutions fully hit their capabilities yet. But I think, yes, and the thing with construction, we're all fickle, right? I think my people want things on a weekly basis, not let's wait 3 months to see what happens, right? Let's wait 6 months. It's really, how can that help me today, right? A simple case is if, with all the tickets we get on a job site, right, with trucks coming in, understanding, tracking, sustainability lead, do we need to have the human go and manually process all that, or can we just take a photo of that and then just again automatically have AI go and categorize that and then put it in these reports that then we can report out? Right there, it shows true impact day one. Right, that's a simple use case, low-hanging fruit for AI. That's something that can start to get this momentum moving forward and getting my leadership more on board with leaning in and giving less governance on some of these opportunities to grow. Right?
You know, you touched on a lot of things early on, and you know, going back again, you know, with us being a low margin industry, there's always this focus on monetary value, right? What's that return on investment, money-wise? And I've been very fortunate to have the support of our leadership team to say, okay, show me the value that you're adding to the job, and if we make some money on that, that's cherry on the top, right? And you know, for me as a VC, like the first time I took the job, I looked at our portfolio and I'm looking at how much we invested. I'm looking at multiple of invested capital, right? What is that? Are we 2x? Are we 3x, right? Well, we're losing some here, right? I looked back at it and had a discussion with our CFO. And I was like, hey, you know, right now, overall portfolio is performing above 1x, but there's these few early ones that they're below 1x, right? We're losing some money. Like, how do we treat that? How do you want me to bring this conversation right to the table? So when we talk about the next investment, that we're talking about the right things and not just talking about money. And she was like, Coach, we'll stop talking. She's like, just listen. She's like, that first investment that we made, right, one of the early ones, we invested that in a company that was helping us on a project that desperately needed that service at that time. This is 10 years ago. And it was a large, 90 plus acre site and had to do with reality capture. And that startup at that time was the only one that could perform that job. And they said, at that time, we more than doubled our productivity and what we needed out of that company at that time. So the way I'm looking at it is we got what we wanted out of that investment. And if something else comes back, money-wise, great. So focus on the value that the investment's adding as a strategic versus what's that monetary value. Now, sure, I'm going to say, I'm going to try to get the monetary value as well. Well, you can't get there on your own as a strategic. You got to have partners to get there. So return on investment, I look at it a few different ways. It's what's the value that it's adding, and did it achieve its outcome, right? It's measured in outcomes, not money.
And jumping to Aaron, given you guys have different investment criteria as you're looking at some of these AI-enabled startups, what are some of the key things that you look for?
Money.
Yeah. Next. No, I ingest. Look, venture is R&D, right? So I spend most of my career in project finance, real estate, in construction, all this stuff, right? Look, real estate's great. I get to borrow someone else's money and I get the upside, right? So like, if you're purely chasing just IRR, I can point to a few things that are really good that may not be what I've chosen to do where I think the best outcomes are, which is in venture, in technology, in this space. But when we do make an investment, undoubtedly, number one is the R&D factor. How is this the eyes and the ears for the future of the industry? How's this changing an industry? Because if you change an industry, like everything's a wash, right? Like you will find financial outcome, but you have to really be confident that like it's going that way. And then number two that we look at is adoption, right? I think Coach Hill said this earlier, which is the expectation for many venture investors is you see 3x growth as like a top quartile performing company, right? Which means last year I had $100,000 of revenue. This year, I'm at $400,000 revenue. Great, that's good. But the ones that are truly incredible go like 100 to a million, right? And then a million to 5, right? And like it's that pace of growth that is a big part of the venture financial outcome playbook. We are more stringent on looking at like that pace of adoption and changing an industry as like big metrics that we try to think about. Because it in the early investment phases, meaning companies that are less than 50 people, it's a big indicator to say, am I onto something, and do a whole bunch of people want to exchange money for it? And that's kind of where we get excited to pass that, what I'll call like threshold barrier.
Yeah, and taking a step back and looking at, I would say like the generalist AI craze. Like if you look at
Yeah,
some
that's
of the
venture math. That's like a whole different.
yeah, that and I
That's
think
a
just
different game altogether.
but just for context, right? Like I think Together AI, I don't know, you guys may have seen, but it's more focused on like software developers, right? It's like helping software developers build software a lot faster with AI. So I think this company went from like $0 to $100 million in like a year or something like that. It's one of the fastest growing AI companies out there. And that's kind of the benchmark for venture capitalists on AI companies right now. And when I look at kind of construction tech and AI, we really don't have companies like that because we're not building like foundation models. We're not building some of these like crazy, AI tools that are like super easily adoptable, right? Yeah. Software engineers are always on their computers and they're.
And we shared this like similar goal, which is a big part of my job is talk to generalist investors and explain to them why is this the industry you want to have exposure in,
Yep.
right? Like
Yep.
why should you guys care about this? They are an incredibly important part of the ecosystem. They're great at building businesses. They're great at attracting tier one talent. They have redundancy on capital. Like there's a lot of virtues, but they're also like metrics driven to a fault, right? And metrics are different here than they are in other areas.
Yes. Yeah.
You have to like have a vision and a decisiveness to help folks get attracted here, and that's a big part of what like I see my job. It's like we hang out a lot, right? We can talk shop on like our war stories of how I screwed a lot of stuff up in my career, and then we can also go over to like how do we do this, and it's bridging that gap between metrics and industry change and R&D that I think is like the secret sauce to increasing the pool of capital interested in our space.
Yeah. And we are seeing like this almost next gen of generalist investors who are now investing in what they call vertical AI. And I think construction tech, AI-enabled construction tech is falling under that. But you would look at those companies more similar to kind of your typical B2B SaaS. So like growth rates are fairly similar. So I kind of put that out there just because, as people are thinking about AI and like what are the, metrics, opportunities, and how I would say like just typical Silicon Valley thinks about it, it is a little bit on the crazier side. But for those of us that are here, even at Brick and Mortar, we're financially driven, we're an institutional VC. But we do have this lens of, strategically, we want to see the industry be better, right? And there are all of these other types of factors, and Kosher, I love that example of like, well, on that job, like we basically, already however many X our value, of that investment. And I do, encourage a lot of people here, as you're thinking about working with the startups and looking at that ROI, the value calculation, whether or not it's, writing a check into the company, but even the time invested, the hope is that these technologies are changing the way that we build. And, however many volunteer hours, there's a lot of us that were part of that volunteer army testing out new tech and trying to get it implemented. I think all of that does kind of pay back in terms of, value, productivity to a lot of those projects. And I think with that, we've got like 5 minutes. So I want to open it up to the audience for questions.
People are leaving.
Actually, I think we have to wait for the mics.
So it's hard to talk about AI as a monolith, and I think you guys are kind of tap dancing through that very well. But I think the question is, when you look at tech adoption and kind of the typical path of construction tech adoption, pilot, review, internal, is there starting to be a change of how you look at that process as it relates to AI? Because it seems like there needs to be. So how are your relative organizations thinking about that?
Why are you looking at me?
I could take a stab at it, and then I'd love to hear your opinion on
Absolutely.
this too. Yeah. AI is changing the way we do some of these POCs on our projects, right? And a lot of reasons for that is, you've opened up this sort of door to a potential cyber threat that could happen to your company if you're not handling this very carefully, right? And at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, you have to balance supporting the startup, giving them what they need so they can grow and build a product they can actually use. So for me, testing, an AI product versus testing another SaaS solution, not AI, versus testing a robotic solution, right? All three of them have different flows and different processes. And on the AI side, Aaron mentioned, it has to happen very rapidly. What's their growth look like? What's their traction look like? What does the customer adoption side look like? And is this something people are willing to pay for, right? That's a good metric, good enough for me to say, you know what, I should look at this even closer as an investor. And on the product side, hardware, like if I were to give you a comparison, hardware takes a lot of upfront capital before it can give you something that's useful, right? But you still have to believe in that product enough to say, I'm going to get the outcome that I'm looking for. And so they're very drastic. Like, we used to have sort of this one process for innovation of how, we ingest technology, how we try it out, and then we propose it for enterprise adoption, right? That was a very linear flow. AI has changed that for us.
Yeah, and I think to add, I think with AI, it's added this component of a much more rigorous evaluation process, right? Again, everything to do with data and data governance. But I think for us, once any solution or tech or product gets to the pilot phase, the evaluation is still very similar, right? I think within that groundswell, I've got one project, one region, all of a sudden it's 2 regions and 6 projects, and you start to see that groundswell. That's where I think as Diverge, I start to really get interested. Now that we've got this product now, it's fairly mainstream. We've got a great partnership, right? It's Concentric's one that, we're looking at in very similar regard, and, hoping to grow that. Like once it gets to that point, then does Diverge engage? Do we look at financial investments? We look at enterprise engagements, and so that whole equation, I think, once it gets in a pilot, is very similar. But I think getting AI solutions to pilot, that is, I think, where the headwind is today with a lot of what we do.
Awesome. Great discussion so far, guys. The question that I have specifically is around digital culture in AI. A lot of us have been trying to create digital culture in our companies before AI showed up. And now that it's here, a big fear that I have is it's going to disrupt the progress that we have made trying to embed digital culture into the way that we just do business. I kind of like to get some of your perspectives on how are you pushing against that, trying to integrate it, trying to make sure that people and robots, people and AI can coexist and successfully achieve that digital culture together and not separately.
I think culture, you have to have a strong foundation where something disruptive cannot shake the culture, right? And so a lot of that foundation begins with, transparency, education, right? Teaching folks, hey, this is not going to take your job, like Atul mentioned with robots, right? And even myself, like using Copilot, for example, that was a learning curve. But I'd invest time in it to learn it, to understand how I can get value out of it, to help myself be more efficient, right? If you show people these kinds of examples, I feel like it can enhance the culture as well as help people be more productive. And that digital sort of transformation that companies look for, it can help you streamline that to now where, a superintendent is now leveraging Copilot, right? Which is freaking amazing. As a tech leader, I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. This is where I want it, right? And I want that guy to be energized. If I can get my 50-year-old superintendent that is excited about BIM and technology, I think I'm doing a good job, right? That's my value, that's my metric. So that's my opinion. I think if you build that strong foundation, start with transparency and talk about what it can and cannot do, and then you educate folks, it can help with that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think for a while, for a few years now, where it's a lot of education. It's a lot of getting out to the projects, talking to individuals that are thinking about using AI on a day-to-day, seeing how they're using AI, right? And so within that, we have this outlook, whether it's the Terminator outlook or you're all Jetsons. Jetsons, AI is going to be amazing, where the Terminator, people are like, oh my God, what are you doing? Terminator a lot from our legal team. But within today, it's absolutely that. It's educating people, putting them at ease, and then within that, giving them, to your point, examples of how to use and leverage AI for the day-to-day. We are open to using ChatGPT, but then there's governance to that. If you're in a federal job, don't be putting that information into ChatGPT. And so some basic engagement rules, I think, is important. But education and really, I think, soothing their fears of what AI can be and how it can help them.
Hey, hi. As Ty and Kaushal were talking about data governance and cybersecurity regarding AI, and how some of the owner developers can either be an enabler or could be a roadblock, right? Because at the end of the day, they are the ones who owns the data. Um, and I'm seeing more and more of a mix of they can be an enabler as if you're using AI. If you're not using AI, you're going to be behind. But what about the folks who are roadblocks, who are more conservative, who are more concerned about cybersecurity, who are more concerned about their customers, who are millions and billions of customers, and who are worried about how the data would be used by AI, and who's going to tell the GCs that no, we do not want to use any tools that would have AI, or it will have to go through scrutiny. As I've been a owner developer last half decade, and we've our evaluation process for AI tool has been no shorter than 1.5 years, and it's a private company. For public enterprise, it's a whole nother story. So the like he was mentioning about adoption, how do you challenge the folks who are being roadblocked?
I have a opinion, thought, optimism kind of thing. Just as we're seeing with AI helping software development speed up, right? I would like to see a world where it gets so easy to develop software with AI that maybe you no longer need to use outside vendors. I know this is a threat to a lot of people that are here, but there's always going to be different customers, different types of, requirements, right? Like if your roadblock is we cannot adopt XYZ technology because of government, because of whatever, like it gets to a point where maybe it does make sense to hire your own data scientist or hire your own whatever, or hire a third party consultant that could build internal AI tools for you, right? And I'm assuming that you're not going to go full blown into developing a whole knowledge management system off the bat, right? Small AI tools here and there to help out with automating workflows. I think a lot of that is all within reach right now with even ChatGPT's agents, right? Like that is pretty incredible now to help you search stuff, find stuff, put together a travel itinerary, create calendar invites. Like that is the pace at which things are changing. I am optimistic that it's going to get easier and a lot more accessible. So my hope is that, depending on what your restraints are, there's going to be an option for you.
I think that you can start small and you can grow from there, right? And what I mean by start small with AI and technology, build it in a controlled environment that is not open to the internet, it's not open to the world, right? You can start there, and as I mentioned that, we've had our own in-house staff that does some of this stuff, and you talk about build versus buy. In that instance, you build. In that instance, you leverage, a model that's accessible, but you build it in an environment that's controlled so that owner has confidence that the data is not going to get out, it's not going to open them up to a cyber threat, right? And you build that confidence there with that owner, and you build that foundation to where the next project, it's a little more leeway, right? So we have done that, internally built, like agents. We've used chatbots using AI for intranet, right? Internal users for DPR. And so it's possible. You just don't think too big, just start small and then grow from there.
Yeah, I think one thing to add, I think back to my follow the data reference, we're working on creating agnostic data sets, right? Where now that we know where the touch points are in terms of how data starts, how it's managed, how it's surfaced, let's create these agnostic data sets, whether it's schedule, it's production engineering rates, that is not reflective on IP, it's not owner's data, it's our data, right? And let's go throw every AI solution at it because, yes, we're not worried about data governance at that point, right? And so that's what we're trying to drive towards, to kind of stem this kind of headwind with governance and privacy. That's another approach that we're doing that's starting to get some legs.
The challenge for the solution providers in the room, the schema can help with this, right? Schema that says, okay, this is how I build this data here, it's unstructured, but within the schema, AI knows what to do with that information, right? We've talked about, okay, well, what if DPR created a schema or Hensel Phelps created a schema? You know what? Sometimes it doesn't matter what we want. Sometimes who's the first to market with the right solution that's going to own that answer, right? So come up with a schema that works for construction companies.